I wish we could have had a whole debate on foreign policy. I find the format of these debates so frustrating because you have a ludicrous number of candidates on stage, 10 candidates, and you're trying to touch on all these different issues across the course of the night. And I wish we could actually drill down into some of these issues in more depth. Like Abdul said, I'd love to have a healthcare debate where we could talk about that issue as a whole, a foreign policy debate where we can get into some of this stuff. We touched on Afghanistan last night and then moved on. We didn't even talk about Israel-Palestine. And on nuclear weapons, Elizabeth Warren is completely right to talk about, not having this ridiculous preemptive policy. Bernie Sanders has been the most progressive candidate on foreign policy by a mile. What's interesting about foreign policy in this Democratic election year, in these primary debates, is that in 2016, Bernie dominated on domestic policy. Now everyone else has kind of pulled his direction. Last night's debate was a reflection of how Bernie Sanders has dragged the Democratic Party leftwards over the last 3 years. But what's interesting is he hasn't dragged them leftwards on foreign policy yet, but he's moved out there. He's saying things about foreign policy. I'd love to have heard the candidates respond to Bernie's proposal last week that you use US aid as leverage to force Benjamin Netanyahu to end the occupation. I'd love to have heard what the other 9 candidates, including Senator Warren, would have said about that. But we didn't get to Israel-Palestine. I guess lack of time, lack of interest.
And very interestingly, this is Detroit. This is where Rashida Tlaib comes from. I don't know if that's what President Trump meant when he said she should go back to where she came from. But we're going to turn to this issue of foreign policy now when CNN's Jake Tapper asked South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg about the war in Afghanistan.
Will you withdraw all U.S. service members by the end of your first year in office?
We will withdraw. We have to.
In your first year?
Yes. Look, around the world, we will do whatever it takes to keep America safe. But I thought I was one of the last troops leaving Afghanistan when I thought I was turning out the lights years ago. Every time I see news about somebody being killed in Afghanistan, I think about what it was like to hear an explosion over there and wonder whether it was somebody that I served with, somebody that I knew, a friend, roommate, colleague. We're pretty close to the day when we will wake up to the news of a casualty in Afghanistan who was not born on 9/11.
Governor Hickenlooper, you disagree. You've said that you're open to keeping some service members in Afghanistan beyond your first term.
I look at it as a humanitarian issue, and with all due respect, you're looking at the condition of women. If we completely pull our troops out of there, you're going to see a humanitarian disaster that will startle and frighten every man, woman, and child in this country. And I don't think, we have troops in over 400 different locations around the world. Most of them are small, they're peacekeeping, they're not greatly at risk. We're going to have to be in Afghanistan. Look at the progress that's happened in that country. We're going to turn our backs and walk away from people that have risked their lives to help us and build a different future for Afghanistan and that part of the world.
That was former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper and South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, their exchange over Afghanistan. I wanted to ask Mehdi Hasan, react to their exchange, and also that they talked about the U.S. troops in Afghanistan, but not much mention of all of the carnage and the deaths that have resulted from this disastrous long-term U.S. occupation there.
Indeed. And, just to go back to my earlier point, John Hickenlooper, why do we care what John Hickenlooper, the former governor of Colorado, thinks about Afghanistan? What does he actually know about Afghanistan? It's interesting, Pete Buttigieg speaking there as a former veteran, talking rightly about the fact that there are now people serving in Afghanistan who weren't born on 9/11, and we're going to have the first casualty at some stage, which will be deeply tragic and deeply frustrating.
Although
he said
there
he would
have been
get troops out.
countless number of Afghan children who have died there who were born after 9/11.
Very good point, Amy. And we never talk about the victims of American wars, even at a Democratic primary debate, because those people are unpeople. They just don't get covered, unfortunately, in the mainstream U.S. media or by Democratic presidential candidates, with some rare exceptions. And that's part of the problem. There wasn't a proper discussion about endless wars. That was my problem with the debate format. We dipped in and out of subjects. We didn't take a big picture approach, which is, what is U.S. foreign policy? What is it for? When is the next president going to use force? Under what circumstances? Which wars are we going to end? Hopefully, most of them, if not all of them. We kind of, jumped in and out, nuclear war, Afghanistan, here and there, and asking people like Steve Bullock and John Hickenlooper what they're going to do when they're never going to be president and they know nothing about foreign policy. So yes, and Pete Buttigieg had a good line, by the way. I don't know if you heard him when he said, I want to be on the debate with Donald Trump because I want to be able to stand there as a veteran and stand next to a guy who pretended to be disabled to get out of fighting in Vietnam. Donald Trump and his famous bone spurs, which I thought was a good line. But then I remembered, sadly, 2004, the Democrats put up John Kerry, the great veteran, against George Bush, the chicken hawk, and it didn't work.
Let's go back to Senator Sanders last night when he praised rival Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Now, Elizabeth is absolutely right. If anybody here thinks that corporate America gives one damn about the average American worker, you're mistaken. If they can save 5 cents by going to China, Mexico, or Vietnam, or any place else, that's exactly what they would do. As president, let me tell you what I will do. These guys line up at the federal trough. They want military contracts. They want all kinds of contracts. Well, under my administration, you ain't going to get those contracts if you throw American workers out on the street.
Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, if you respond to this, and then we're going to go around the round table to find out what you want to see tonight in the next of the 10 candidates that are running in the Democratic presidential primary.
Yeah, I want to make a point about what Mehdi was saying. We make this differentiation between foreign policy and domestic policy when our foreign policy has dominated so much of our budget. We are involved in nearly 80 countries in the world, 14 of which our troops are seeing active combat. That costs a lot of money. And beyond that, we are shipping weapons abroad. We are subsidizing foreign military. That is all money that's being used, like you said, Amy, to kill children abroad, when we could be using that same money to save children's lives at home. And we're not doing that. And that's the point we have to be making. But on that broader point, the dominance of corporations in the ways that they have lobbied our government to make policy that is fundamentally about moving American materiel into countries where it doesn't need to be, into selling our healthcare system to the highest bidder, these corporations who have dominated it, into making decisions about who can and can't have prescription drugs, basic things that people need in their lives. This question of whether or not we're willing to deal with the system of inequality and the ways that corporations have created that really is the differentiator between people like Senators Sanders and Warren and the other folks. Are we willing to deal with that system?